Well, good afternoon. My name's Teresa Kittridge, and I am with 100-Row Women. I am with Heidi Holtan today. Really excited to have Heidi as our guest on 100-Row Women and Their Stories podcast. So welcome, Heidi.
Thank you, Teresa.
Heidi was a big part of uh, helping me think through the podcast. So I want to thank you for that. And, being a professional in media was really a great opportunity for me to sit down and pick your brain. So I really appreciated that. And one of the first questions we like to start with is one that you and I had talked about. And Heidi and I were just talking also that we've played a little bit as we started this podcast, and we were starting out with reading a bio, but really your bio will come through as we talk. So we've really sort of changed our format a little bit, but excited about that. But Heidi, I want to start out with our first question that you and I had talked about when we met. Gosh, I guess last fall. Can you share a lesson or something that you learned from a grandmother or another influential older woman in your life?
Yeah. I told you that I love this question because I feel like you get asked it. Sometimes people pose it to you too broadly or something, and this is specific. And especially if you're a person of a certain age, you don't get asked. If people assume you don't have grandparents anymore, they don't ask you about them. So that's why I love it when I talk to people. But yes, my grandma Ina, I think of her daily and the things that I got to do with her, the things she would say to me. Her name was Ina. We called her Ina. I thought that was a name for grandma. So I didn't really realize that was her first name for a long, long time. I feel so connected to her. She grew up in Jacobson, Minnesota on the farm and went to Minneapolis when she was 15. And I never expected to live in northern Minnesota. And she was still alive when I moved here. And she thought that was so cool. I was kind of moving back to where she came from because she lived her whole life in Minneapolis or most of it, and then on to Brainerd. But one of the things, I mean, she was funny. She just had fun at everything she did. I lucked out. I went to the University of Minnesota, and my grandparents lived in Robbinsdale. And so it was my home away from home. As often as she could coerce me to come over, she'd say, I'll do your laundry. Let's play some canasta. And then we'll go for she's very physically active, which my mother wasn't. It sort of skipped a generation. And so whenever I would go over there, it's like, we got to go for a walk or we got to go to the spa, she would call it, which was US Swim and Fitness. But
I love it.
there was just something about her, like as a very little kid, I remember watching PBS because Ina was going to be on there. And she was on in a black leotard doing yoga, which I didn't know what yoga was, and I just was like, she just was sort of like that and strong. And one of the things I remember her saying to me, probably when I was too young, she said, when you get married, you keep your own money. And I was like, okay, what do you mean? She goes, well, you never know if you need a quickie divorce in Mexico. And I'd be like, what? I'm like, I'm 12. What do you mean? And it was just like a joke that she and my mother had. Apparently, the Star Tribune used to have these little ads for quickie divorces from Mexico. And both of them were married their entire lives and didn't need that. But she's like, you never know. And so, I got married when I was 35 and I'd done my own money. I wasn't about to do that anyway, but it really hit me of like, oh no, Ina said, so I'm gonna keep my money separate. Because she said, I don't want to have to ask Grampy to go buy a new couch. And I was like, okay. It made some sense. So is it just a weird thing to look back on that kind of funny thing makes you kind of independent? Even though she was a very traditional wife and mother, but she always worked so she could have these, things that she wanted and she didn't have to ask for.
And I do think that, as you said, traditional, but
Hmm.
realistic and independence. I mean, that's a huge piece, I think, too, that I picked up from my grandmother, Cecilia. It was like independence is super
Hmm.
important. So I know that when you think about moving to northern Minnesota and your connection to rural, can you talk a little bit about your connection to rural?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. I grew up in Brainerd, which probably no one would think of as rural nowadays, but it was. At the time we moved to Brainerd to my mom and dad bought a resort, a family resort. And so that became sort of a long history of family working together. That was the first business we all did, and then we went on to have another family business. So it was like we moved up when I was 8, and it was suddenly all about kind of the outdoors and packaging leeches and being out on the lake and cleaning cat. I was so mad because on Saturdays I couldn't watch cartoons like my friend did because we had to clean cabins. That's a turnover day, And of course, I grew up in a time where only one day a week were there cartoons on for just a few hours.
Right.
So that I think that must have that hardworking sort of rural life, and I saw my mom not love this because we moved up and my dad was still working. He was a traveling salesman. So, she was like, oh, he wanted to do this. And then I end up doing the work all week, and he certainly worked hard once he got home. But I didn't really plan on coming back to Brainerd. I did end up coming back to Brainerd when I was 29 or moving back to work for the family business. And that was a whole different experience as an adult, as a single woman being in the town you grew up in that has gotten so much bigger. And I needed a place, I needed something that wasn't about my family, if that makes sense, or about my growing up. And so KEXE was that kind of respite for me in my little office. And it kind of became, I said to my best friend at that time, I said, if I ever have time, you force me to go volunteer at the station because it scared me. I was like, there's no way I'm going to do it because how am I going to have time to do this? But I secretly want to do this. And lo and behold, about a year and a half later, my family's business sells. I mean, my dad had told me that he was planning to do that. And I found myself at a point in life where I didn't have to work immediately. I was doing sort of side jobs and wasn't quite sure what I was going to do, So she made me start volunteering there. And yeah, I just thank her all the time that she pushed me to do that because I don't know if I would have remembered that I had said that to her. And then that led me to a place that my brother describes Grand Rapids area as like what Brainerd was like back in the day. And I'm not sure it's exactly that, but there is definitely more of a rural feel. And then just the scope of what KXE does, that we are the voice for people in rural places that maybe don't have neighbors or, don't have big places they're living in. And I fell in love with it by doing the work at KXE.
So tell me about that. So what did you volunteer for when you did volunteer? What was your first gig?
Music. I was a
Okay.
music loved, it's basically like you get to make the audience a mixtape, which I loved doing in college for my friends and forcing them to listen to my music. And then I started hosting Real Women Alive. It was a Thursday night show that was just women's music. And I majored in women's studies in college. I'm like, okay, now I can finally tell my dad why I majored in women's studies, because he didn't understand why I would do that. And then this is that time in my life where I had some extra time. So I just saw, I don't know if I would have consciously said that to you, but I could see this might be my future. And so whenever they needed something, I'd be like, sure, I'll do that. Yep. You mean for a fundraiser? Sure, I'll do that. And there was a woman that was on that was a librarian from Pine River. And I just said, if she's ever like not able to be on, I love books, I'll be on. And then I think she passed away. And I was like, they kind of came to me and I said, oh yeah, I can start a book show. So I started Real Good Words and started, sort of committed at first to once a week, half an hour. I was still living in Brainerd at the time and coming to Grand Rapids as a volunteer. And I just it was about a year and a half, 2 years that I volunteered and just in my quiet way, maybe was pretty pushy about why they should hire me.
I love it.
And yeah, it ended up, I think I moved to Grand Rapids before I actually had the job because I really wanted to make it happen.
Did you come in? What was your first job? Your first paid job then?
I was 15 hours a week
Okay.
and it was outreach producer was the name of the job. And I think it took only 3 months for me to tell them that it should be full time.
Talk a little bit about KXE too. I just think it's such a unique
Yeah.
station, unique model.
Yeah. I think especially in the moment that we are in and media that is really, if there are things about rural places in media, it is told for an urban audience. It is not stories told for people who live in rural places. And, we see that all the time. I'm sure you do too, of like if the New York Times flies in to cover this story on this one thing they think is the hot topic of northern Minnesota, they come in for 3, 4 days and then they think they have this story and you read it and you're like, that's not really, I think you missed a big portion here. And it's because they're not telling the story for the people who live here. They're telling it for a wider audience. And so that has been so apparent in probably the last 10, 15 years about our important role. We don't have a goal of like, let's, hopefully the Twin Cities will pick us up or the Twin Cities will do this or, to be a bigger station or an urban station. We just are more and more committed to small towns and northern Minnesota. And despite the way the world has gone and losing federal funding for public media, we are thriving because we have not lost our commitment to community. And we have built a newsroom in the last 3 years that has won already so many awards and done so many amazing things that I think we didn't expect the outpouring that people would still continue to support us. And then it turns out that because, rural places are often news deserts, there are foundations and places that are funding media. And, we do all the things that usually those kinds of organizations want, which we partner with other people. We're nonprofit. There's things like that just that kind of magically line up with some of that funding. So we're in a pretty good spot right now. I mean, it's still, of course, precarious and the world is pretty divided, but a lot of what we do, I think people aren't used to because media is so different now that we are nonpartisan, that we are, we're not just here to serve the progressive people of northern Minnesota. We serve everybody. And you really hear that, especially in a program like Green Cheese Trivia on Saturday nights, where it's everybody who is calling in, and we're very proud of our news is very important, but so is entertainment. So is something like Green Cheese Trivia, you know. So yeah, I'm really proud of being around. So we just celebrated our 50th birthday and we were also the first rural public radio station in the nation. And they didn't want to give us a license, the CPB, because they said no one would listen in a rural place.
Interesting.
You'll be broadcasting to a bunch of gophers. And so it took our founders like a couple of years to actually get a license and to be able to broadcast. And so we're really proud of that. We're really kind of using that to spur us to go forward. And, it's, how it is where you don't really realize how many years you've been doing something. I realize I'm not the new kid there anymore, but I've been there for half of the history of the station. I'm like, wow, okay. I've had to kind of rethink that. Like, okay, I have been there a while. I have done a lot of different things. So it's been a really fun year where we will continue to celebrate because it's a big deal. We're still around.
And with the green cheese too, you talk about, broader audience, but we have a mutual friend, Jeff, an MP King from Alaska, and he was
Yep.
telling me, oh, there was this really cool. Have you ever listened to Green Cheese? And it's then we found out we both knew you, so it was just
I
hilarious.
know.
So when you think about how
Yeah.
broad some of that goes, it's a lot of fun.
Well,
So.
and that was he was a fishing guide that my brother mentored under. And I remember being in the boat with him catching salmon. He always called me darling. Come on, darling, pull that in. And it was during the pandemic, and my brother was listening all the time. And that was when I was hosting Green Cheese a lot because we couldn't have volunteers in. Turns out pretty dangerous to have microphones and talking
Oh,
during
sure.
the pandemic. So my husband and I hosted a lot, and my brother kind of started his own little crew of people that were listening. And that's where Jeff King found out about it.
Yeah, that's so much fun. When you think about, you've gotten to do a lot of cool things. I just keep thinking back to, oh my God, how do you package leeches? When I think of leeches, I think of like little suckers. But you've done everything from, resort, which is probably an amazing life and a really hard life. It's like
Yeah.
a lot of work, and just all the different things you've done. What are some of the most, some highlights or some of the things that have been most meaningful for you in your professional career, personal life?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say I mentioned that there was the other family business that was sold. I was very proud of my dad. It seems so antiquated now, but our family made phone books and, we don't need phone books anymore. And he sort of could see the writing on the wall And in thinking about our conversation today, his whole concept was rural towns because he'd been working for other companies selling yellow pages and doing this stuff, and he saw that, there's a million tiny little directories, but people needed to know, if you live in Deer River, you also want to know what's going on in Grand Rapids. You need a phone book for there, and you don't want to have 10 phone books. So he started making these regional telephone directories around the state of Minnesota. And yeah, he started with one, the Brainerd area, and he ended up with 17 in the state and grew the business to, it was started in the basement of our resort where I was having to proofread white page listings at a very young age, and moved to 200, 250 people by the time he
Wow.
sold the business. So watching my dad navigate and change all along the way and sometimes make mistakes, but also he felt terrible selling the business because he was employing so many people. And I learned so much from him, how you treat the people you work with. He made sure that my brother and I were with him with each person. He wanted to have a personal conversation with every person that worked there. And my dad was a crier. It was a beautiful thing. And he cried in almost every conversation.
Oh,
And he gave them probably half of what the sale was. He gave to them to thank them because he said, I wouldn't be here without you. And it'd be like he's talking to the janitor and saying that. So, I'm not sure that I would be who I am without that kind of work ethic and that way of treating people. But I didn't always, I didn't necessarily embrace that. I never wanted to come back and work for the family business at all. Obviously I love my dad, and he kind of whispered to me, I'm probably going to sell, so it's not going to be your whole career. I know you don't, I know you don't want to do this. So what I did in between while I was in college at the University of Minnesota, it turns out was my job was almost more impactful than school for me. So I got a job as a library aide at the Legislative Reference Library, which we have a little connection there too.
yes.
Were you in the revisor's office or
No,
house
chief
research?
clerk. Chief
Chief
clerk.
clerk. Because
Mm-hmm.
the first time I met you, I recognized your name from some of the documents and stuff. But so I just remember I applied for the job, didn't get it. Then I applied for this other job to be a nanny, got that. And then I got a call back that this other person didn't take the job. And I remember calling my mom, and it's like, I don't know. I don't want to say no to these people and their kids. And she's like, are you kidding me? She's like, that is not going to stick with you being a nanny. I know you want to be nice to those people, but that's ridiculous. So I had to make that choice. I hadn't started that job yet, so it was okay. But turns out, I worked there 10 years as a student, and then moved into I was working with legislative history, so helping people when they came to find out why a law became what it was, and the kind of detective work you have to do, and, reel-to-reel machines and cassette tapes, and learning. We were nonpartisan, so that set me up for a good, being a nonpartisan now. And then I was a legislative history assistant, and, I'm the biggest nerd. I love microfiche and microfilm because we'd be doing a lot of that, and documents, state documents. And then I became, my final role there was interlibrary loan manager, and I was very happy with that as well. And I loved it. And I thought maybe I wanted to go into library science because I really liked working there. And then at some point, I just thought, no, I think I like this because I like the pace. Like during the legislative session, it was super busy. And then in the off season, it was more, long-term projects and doing research on certain things. And it was a job where you just learned all of the time. And I think that's probably what KAXE has been for me too, is I've had so many different roles, and then every single interview or project I do is kind of starting at scratch and learning from other people. And it's not that different, oddly, than being a librarian, kind of being on the radio, because you're asking, librarian's not going to tell you the answer. They're going to give you the information for you to make it yourself. So
Yeah, I don't think, and so many people, if you don't know the legislature at all, you wouldn't even know, oh, there's a library?
yeah.
What do they do? And so when you think about, I mean, requests and even like
Mhm.
the lending side you were doing, I mean, tell us a little bit about that. So
Yeah.
legislators and staff would reach out and say, I'm working on such and such, or tell us a little bit about the inner workings of that. And I think that's interesting.
Oh my, nobody ever asks me this. Thanks, Teresa. I love it. So, because I'm super proud of what we did there as student workers. First of all, it was really fun. When you go to the University of Minnesota, it's so huge. that you don't, it's not the quintessential, you're in a movie and hang out and meet someone on the quad kind of thing. It's
Right.
just, it's too big, and I
Right.
obviously wasn't going to be in a sorority or do things like that. So all the student workers were from different colleges in Minneapolis, St. Paul area. And so that was really great. They became some lifelong friends, and just interesting. Then I would spend time on other campuses because of that. But the main thing we did when I first started, we were newspaper clippers. And we had a lady named Zona who was just the best. I just loved
Yes.
Zona. Do you know Zona?
Yes, of
Oh my gosh.
course.
I loved
Everybody
Zona.
does. Everybody knows her. Yeah,
That
that
is,
worked
oh
there.
my God. We would sometimes find her rubber thumb in the newspaper articles. She would forget it or snack. She was eating while she was doing it. And she was such a lovely woman. So Zona would take all the papers, and we had these voluminous newspaper clipping files, and they were by topic, they were by name. So everybody who was serving in the legislature had a folder. So she would look through a paper, and anytime any legislator, she'd circle that and she'd write, this is also about taxes. So she'd put it under the tax code and the legislator's name. And so we'd have to photocopy it or find the other copy of the paper and cut it out and then file those things away. So then on the other end of that would be legislators saying, I want to know everything that's been in the papers about taxes. And so you'd grab that file, or their assistants would come in and you'd bring them all these things so they could look through it. And as far as I know, because I still know some people that work there, I mean, they're still, you can't, even though you can do so many more things online, you can't really replicate that system.
Right.
And so they're still using those files that we worked on. And it was just so interesting. Then it got me, I wasn't necessarily a newspaper reader before that. And so that's what my job was. I'm looking at the newspaper, and then someone else is telling me what the topic is. And, I wouldn't necessarily read every single thing, but man, you were just so aware of it. And she also did the papers around the state of Minnesota. And so it was so informative in that sense. And then I'm still in touch with who's maybe my second boss there. He went on to be a librarian at St. Thomas. And he comes to KAXE events now, which is so fun. I've reconnected with him. And he came in, I kind of made him cry because Dan came into our clipping room one day, and we'd had KDWB on, cranked pop music and stuff. And he'd come in and he'd go, hey, my brother's got a report. His brother is Tom Jelton on NPR. We got to listen to it. So he turned the channel. I'd never heard public radio before, and of course I would want to please the boss who would listen. And then I found myself getting back in my car and turning on public radio. And so I told him that. I said, I didn't know what it was. And he's like, oh, and you've come to now you're doing this. And so it led to a lot of things you would never really expect. And I also thought it was really interesting. We would go through all the periodicals that came in, do the same sort of thing. And so as staff people, I think transportation was one of the topics I was looking for within all these magazines. And we'd make these once a week. A legislator would get this flyer that said, here's all the articles we've seen in our periodicals, just circle what you want. And then it would be my job to go copy all those articles and get them to them. And it was just, you can't really put a price on what all of that information did. And besides, I don't think it's only been since I came to KAXE that I realized how much I understand the legislative process in a way that most people do not, of course. And that's been really interesting. And then, I've gotten to interview so many elected officials over the years in my job here that I don't know that I would have felt as comfortable doing that if I didn't have that background. I think it would have been more intimidating than it was.
I think just that whole background in the legislature of different staff roles and,
Mhm.
when I was an intern, like many, many years ago, I interned for John Brandel, who was an economics professor and ended up being dean of the Humphrey Institute, but he served in the House and the Senate. So I worked for him in the House. And he was a big user of the reference library. So that was one of the
Mhm.
first things that he had his assistant get me acquainted with.
Hmm,
And
that's crazy.
yeah, it's amazing. Then I just think of it used to be just a great place too to go up and have lunch
Mhm.
and read different newspapers. So that's just a big resource in the legislature that I always appreciated because it helps members make decisions. It helps
Yeah.
legislators and staff have a better understanding what the issues are, and those nonpartisan offices are super important to the whole legislative process. And I just think that you work in libraries just incredible.
Well, and another thing I didn't really realize until I reconnected with Dan, my former boss, was he said, "Oh, you were the one who'd walk in the clipping room and say, 'We need to go pick this up from Senator so and so's office.' But you were always like, 'Me, I'll go.'" And I was
I'll
like,
go.
"Did I?" Like, I don't remember that, but it was so exciting when we got to go to the Capitol. I mean, I didn't love taking a giant cart over there in the tunnel
The
system and stuff
tunnel
was
up the hill.
Yep,
Yeah.
stuff
Yeah.
was falling out on the sides and, I didn't love that part, but I did really love, being a little bit of a part of it in that sense and always sort of understood like this just wasn't a regular job. This was kind of even though I was a very small cog and everything, it's like it's a big deal to be around
Yeah, it
this
is, and I
government.
think it gives you an appreciation too of what their jobs are, but also that
Mhm.
elected they're just people. They're your neighbors. I mean, that's what I always say to people. It's like, yeah, they might be the governor, but they're just like your neighbor, and so it sort of, in one sense, shows you everything that they work on and all the such a multifaceted
Yeah.
role. But on the other hand, they're just like us and approachable. That's what I love about our legislature. It's a citizen legislature, and I
Mhm.
just think that's such an important piece. And I know we've talked about this a little bit, but so did you know what you wanted to do when you're growing up? Did you have a vision for it, or did you ever think you'd be doing what you're doing today?
No, not at all. But I do kind of have a theory that you know how when you're a kid you play games, you might play house or you might do that. I used to play radio
There you go.
and I made cassette tapes of my radio station and in college, my friend who would do it with me she found a copy of it and gave it to us. And I thought it was going to, and sure, it was like all kind of poop jokes or,
Right.
whatever it might be. But I was also like pretending I was a man on the street, asking questions about abortion, which I did not know that I even knew what that word meant at the time, I was doing that. So I don't know that I thought about that again, but I also played librarian, and that's just due to my older siblings stole library books, so I had some books that had the cards in it, so that was kinda cool. But I did take a couple radio classes at the University of Minnesota,
Oh,
and I
okay.
liked it, but I don't think I really thought that that was something you could do. Because right after the 2 classes I took, I was in a class and then I was like a TA in the class in the radio lab, and they tore the building down, like, right after. So it's like there was no more radio stuff, it was just TV, and I wasn't as interested in the TV part of it. And I just kinda put it aside. It didn't seem like something one would do. So, kind of, but not exactly. It wasn't like a grand plan by any means.
Yeah, isn't it? It's funny how things sort of roll too. I always say I still don't know. I still don't know what I'm going to do. Sort of,
Yeah. I no
but it
kidding.
sort of does. There's sort of a theme that runs through. I think
Mhm.
sometimes. So you're busy. Your job's consuming. You're engaged in the community. What do you do for fun? How do you recharge? What do you do to take care of yourself?
Well, I'm lucky enough to live on a lake, so in the actually all the times of the year, because I also enjoy even just taking walks on the lake in the wintertime or skiing out there. I found skiing I've really enjoyed in the last years. That helps a lot. And then getting out on the lake, swimming in a lake can just like wash everything away. It's just one of the best things you could possibly do. I also still I read a ton. I absolutely love reading. And in the last boy, it hasn't been very long, maybe 6 months, 9 months. I'm not a very artistic person. I like to write, and I used to think that I was gonna write a novel, and I've done different writing classes over the years, but for some reason now I've taken to kind of some crafting and thrift shopping, and I've found that one of the best stress relievers there is, this kind of thrift shopping and looking for certain things, and, I come home and my automatic response is to sort of hide it from my husband, like, "Oh, I've been to the thrift store again," and he's like, what is wrong with you? You spent $1. You don't need to feel guilty about this. I would have never expected that I would like something that much, and it's been a really interesting thing about I made a vow at the beginning of this year that I'm buying no new clothes this entire year. It's all thrifted clothes, and it's been really cool. It's been a really interesting thing for me in, like, how I feel about myself and how I dress because it's a different concept than walking into a store. If that makes sense? You kind of create it out of who knows what, and there's a story behind these things, someone else has worn them, and I just didn't expect that. I kinda just did it, like, maybe for thrift reasons, for money, thinking I don't need to spend money on this, and it's been a lot more than that.
Yeah, that is interesting. And I was just at the mall in Grand Rapids the other day, the old mall, and there's so many different thrift stores in there now. I was like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, there's a lot of different choices and a lot of
Y-
different
Yeah.
pieces I walked through. Is it Clara's Closet
Yeah.
or whatever? Oh my gosh,
Yep.
they have like everything you can possibly imagine in there. So I had to
Yeah.
peek
Well,
through that a little bit.
I'll have to let you know I'm about half a step away from having my own little section in Claire's.
Oh, good for
They don't
you.
know. They don't. I'm just kidding.
They
That's sort
don't
of
know
my
yet,
joke.
but
But
it's
who
going to
knows?
happen.
That's good. I like doing things that are absolutely not related to my work. It's just great. I don't run into people, I need to talk about work when I go to thrift stores. I don't. It's just there's something about it that is just me, myself, not my role in the community. I think that's what I like about it too.
No, that's a good, and I think that's a good way to sort of step back and then
Yeah.
recharge. Um, when you talk about swimming in the lake too, I mean, I feel super fortunate to live here. And, I grew up in southern Minnesota, so more farmland and, a few lakes, but you know, up here, I live in Turtle Lake, and oh my gosh, the water's so clear and
Hmm.
deep, and forest and trees. So it's just a different piece. But there's something about water that just
Yeah.
that's sort of that is totally my jam of what I'm always looking for to just sort of step back a little bit and relax. And when I think about how can I keep going forward and how can I keep a positive outlook? So when you think about, what gives you hope for the future when you think about what's going on in the world today. There's just a lot of things going on in the world today, and you're right in the heart of it because you're in news, you're in local
Hmm.
issues, you hear national issues. How do you stay positive and what gives you hope?
Well, I think keeping a focus when it comes to like news being overwhelming, kind of keep steering myself back to local or statewide rather than the national level, and kind of keeping that in mind that, the county commissioners have more to do with my day to day life, or the city council more than who the president of the United States is, and that helps. I think now being at KXE for as long as I have, there's a younger generation there now that are excited and they have new ideas. And being now an elder statesman there, I wanted to be someone who didn't, it wasn't terrible, but I remember facing a lot of, oh, we tried that once, it didn't work. Oh, we tried that, that didn't work. And I'm not going to be that person to someone, I don't want to do that. And so that's made me be more open-minded, and there's such fresh energy and young people. I work with someone who is, now I'm going to have to do math, this is not going to be good, 25, more than 25 years younger than I am, and I've learned so much from her. It's amazing. So that keeps new people, new voices, has happened all along, and we're at a great spot right now where everybody is really enthused to do the work they're doing. It's a nonprofit. Everybody deserves a lot more pay than what we're getting paid for in these roles, but how often do you get to do the kind of work that we get to do? And it feels like everybody there right now understands that there's a bigger meaning for the work you do. That even, typing up what is going on in Virginia during the Land of the Loon Festival or something is important. That's lifting up, the way that you word it so someone hears it and might go to that. Even the smallest thing can make a little bit of a difference in someone's life that's listening, just to feel like, if they're isolated, just to, oh, there's festivals going on. Oh, there's a pancake breakfast. Oh, there's this thing going on, or there's help out there. And it gives me hope at how many hardworking people are trying to make things happen in small towns. And I get that opportunity to talk to them, and then you get really excited because I just met this woman who met her at garage sale. She's on the Bovey City Council. Shout out to Nancy Lynn. And I ran into her because she and I did some roller derby together. And of course, as you do,
I was
right?
just gonna say, okay, we got to talk about roller derby, but
Yeah.
yes.
So she kind of grabbed me as I was checking out, and she just said, I just love Bovey, and she's like, I'm sorry. I got to tell you about it. And I was like, okay. And she's like, I don't know why. I grew up in, suburb of the Twin Cities, but I found myself here and I love it. And we have a dog park and it's different than other dog parks. And then we're raising money for a splash pad. And then, and she just had so much to tell me. And so then I was like, okay, you should be on the air and talk about this. And she's like, oh, I don't think I could do that. I'm like, yeah, you could. Yes, you could. You just be yourself, and then it turned out to be such a fun interview. She brought her grandson and he was hilarious. He knew everything too about Bobby. But I don't remember where I'm going with that, except that I love meeting those kinds of people that really care so much about what's going on.
Yeah, that whole community engagement piece I think is so important. And okay, well, we can't let roller derby pass. So are you still playing?
No, 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 no. I'm Teresa, I'm 57 years old. Are you kidding me? No, but I think I was one of the oldest players, and I will shout out to who's now the executive director of KAXE, Sarah Bignell. She wrote me into it. She wasn't working at KAXE then. We just knew each other through some other projects, but she called me. There was a team in Bemidji, and she just said, "Hey, we're thinking of seeing if we could start a roller derby team here." And I was like, "Oh, that's great. It's really good." She goes, "You want to be involved?" I said, "I can write your press releases." And she's like, "No, no, that's not what I mean. I think you should skate with us." And I was like, "What? I've never been in a sport in my life. I was in marching band and yearbook in high school. I have no idea." But we went, she's like, "Well, just meet me at the Playmore, the roller rink, and see if you like it." I forgot I have a certificate in roller skating from when I was in 6th grade, and that
Ah,
I actually love roller skating. And then, so I was kind of like, okay, maybe I could do this. This is crazy. Generally, I've done things when they kind of scare me. And it was just like, this is something else. And so we had the first meeting at the Grand Rapids Area Library. We, announced it on KXE, probably got it in the paper. And I thought like 6, 7 people would show up, friends of friends or something like that. And we had 70 women showed up, and it was the first time in my life where, because I was registering people, where women would walk in. It felt like I should have known better. I majored in women's studies, but women would walk in, and the bigger they were, I'd go, "Oh, she's going to be good." Like, it just turned my whole perception of like women and strength. Like, even in that first meeting, it was crazy. And then turns out, and I was sort of the one who was pretty pushy on this to the younger players down the road, we became a nonprofit. Well, that's pretty good experience for people to have, to run a nonprofit. And we gave back to the community, and we did all this stuff, and we also skated and knocked each other over and traveled and did all these things. My alter ego is butterscotch bitch, so there's that. So I did it about maybe 4.5 years, I think. I told myself, the minute I'm worried that I'm going to break something, because 7 of my friends had the same break in their tibia fibula, the exact same break. And when the 8th did, I was like, okay, I'm done. Yep.
I'm done.
Because
Time to
it's
be
about
done.
it's about ready to happen, and it's going to affect the rest of my life probably. And so, but it was huge. It was such a huge thing for me to feel strong in a different way. If that makes any sense. Yeah.
I know that, you're a book lover, and I've, heard your interviews with different authors, which I totally love. What are you listening to, reading, watching? I mean, what is there anything you want to share with folks?
Yeah. Minnesota Lynx. Minnesota
Ah,
Lynx. It
yes,
is Lynx season. So
yes.
yeah, I absolutely love women's basketball. I've honestly never watched sports either. That was a new thing for me. And we kept talking about it on our sports show, and slowly it was like, maybe I'd like basketball. I just love how well it's doing. They now, the women have created this other league that is in the off season so that players don't have to go overseas, and they were able to negotiate contracts to make a decent living for being professional athletes. And so after the last 2 years of this 3-on-3 league that happens in the wintertime for about a month and a half, 2 months, now I know players outside of the Minnesota Lynx. So this season is just even more fun to watch any of the teams, and it's growing, and expansion teams. And so, yeah, that's one of the things it really helps, for me to have that to look forward to, even if, they don't do so well. But, and then as far as reading, I'm in a little bit of a glut. The things I've liked mostly recently for some reason are books that they call them epistolary. So books written in letters. The Correspondent, I just adored that book. It was just, you can tell a story in such a different way if you're reading someone's letters. It's I don't know, it's something else. And then The Unexpected Journals of Emma M. Lyon is a series. There's eight volumes of that. And so that has a similar feel to me of like, it's almost voyeuristic. You're getting to look at
Mhm.
someone's letters or getting to look at someone's journals. And those are the ones that have stood out. Otherwise, my typical kind of like, I don't remember that book that I read last week, kind of just to keep me a Hallmark movie of books sort of thing. And I will not say that that's important too, as much as the more literary ones.
Yeah, it can be a good escape, I think, too, when you do that.
Hmm.
So, and I know that you do this in your work and in your life, but can you talk a little bit about how you think we can better support women, rural women?
That is a really good question. So I think we could be supporting each other more. And I don't mean it like the kind of the trope that women are terrible to each other or competing. I just mean that we are all so busy. And I think everybody means, because I mean, let's be honest, women are running everything in rural places and there's not time. And I think we mean to be really supportive of the women in our communities, but we don't often take the time to do it or to tell them that you see what they are doing. And I've noticed this in the last few years, and I'm trying to, the thoughts I have about women in that way, I'm trying to make sure I get them out, even if it's just an email or do that kind of thing. Because when people have done that for me, it's made a huge difference just to kind of be seen. And I realize I get compared to most people in their jobs because my job is public and people feel like they know me from the radio. I get a lot more of that than most people do in their jobs. So I kind of want to pass that along to people as well, to women.
And when we did our initial research with 100 Rural Women, that was one of the things that came out with that leadership confidence piece, and it was
Yeah.
acknowledgement and
Hmm.
public acknowledgement, but just being better at what you're just saying, letting people know, hey, that was great. Hey,
Hmm.
you should think about, you're doing all the work, you should run for that, or you should have a more formal role. And so, but we really did hear that from women, that that is such a big piece of it, because it's that confidence piece that it seems like men are sort of born with it sometimes. That's generalizing, but
Yeah.
women feel like they need to know so much more to take the next step. And so I
Hmm.
think that that is a big piece of it. And so I know I just have appreciated your time today. And we always like to close with this question, which of course with me, two-parter question, but what advice would you give your younger self? And what advice would you give a young rural woman trying to navigate?
It's related somewhat to my last answer. I would say every time I have sort of believed in someone else or reached out to help someone else kind of be lifted up or kind of invested in people that I think could be good in something else, it's like I've never regretted it, even if it didn't quite work out, because nothing ever works out the way you expected. But that's one thing I'm sort of proud of in my role at KAXE of people who are there now. I sort of saw how they could be the future of the station and have tried to really get them on board, get them to do something maybe different roles. And I think that's the thing I would have told myself from when I was a kid. Stories kept me company and made you feel less lonely, and stories are really about people. So, kind of keeping that, but being a little more, even as a quiet, hard to believe I was quiet and shy as a young girl, but I was. But investing in those stories or those people is like never really going to steer you wrong.
Absolutely. Well, anything else you can think of that you'd like to share before we close today?
No, I don't think so.
Oh my gosh, this has been incredible.
Uh,
I just have appreciated your time, and what I love about these podcasts is they just learn so much. I love the roller derby part. That's just like the best. That's the best. And the leeches, packing leeches. No, so it's so
yes,
fun.
yeah. Is
I
that
love it.
that's going to be my title? You have really good questions. I know you sent them ahead of time. I looked at them, but I tried not to over
Right.
prepare. But you've done so much work to like make these conversations meaningful but easy. And in the ones I've listened to already, and I'm just excited to see what happens as you go forward. I'm so glad
Yeah.
you're doing it. You're doing it,
It's so much
Teresa.
fun. I love
Yeah.
it.